I am 26 years old and a woman. My family always said Easter was about togetherness. It was the one holiday my mother, Eleanor, insisted on. Christmas could be spent with in-laws. Thanksgiving could be a quiet affair. But Easter was for her family, in the house my grandfather built. This year was different. I felt it the moment I walked through the door. The air was thick with a tension I could not name. My sister, Clara, gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes. Her husband, Mark, barely looked up from his phone. My parents greeted me with hugs that felt too brief. "Lily, you're here," my mother said. Her voice was strained. I chalked it up to the stress of hosting. I had brought a homemade lemon cake, my father's favorite. I placed it on the kitchen counter. Clara walked over and looked at it. "Oh, you brought a store-bought cake," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement meant to sting. "I baked it this morning, Clara," I replied. My voice was quiet. She just shrugged and walked away. This was how it always was with her. Small cuts, tiny jabs that made me feel like an outsider in my own home. Dinner was a performance. We talked about the weather. We talked about Mark's job. He had recently started a new business venture, something about sustainable tech. He spoke about it with a grand, sweeping importance that seemed to impress my parents. I asked a simple question about his business model. He waved his hand dismissively. "It's a bit complex for you to understand, Lily," he said. My father, David, quickly changed the subject. I felt a familiar heat rise in my cheeks. I was a project manager for a construction firm. I understood complex models. But in this house, I was always the little sister, the one who did not quite get it. After dinner, the issue of sleeping arrangements came up. Clara and Mark had taken my old bedroom. Their 2 children were in the guest room. That was expected. I had assumed I would be sleeping on the pull-out sofa in the living room, like I usually did when the house was full. But my mother wrung her hands. "About that," she started, avoiding my eyes. "We have some other guests arriving very early in the morning. They need a place to rest before the egg hunt." I was confused. I had not heard about other guests. "Who is coming?" I asked. My mother looked at my sister. Clara stepped in, her voice smooth and practiced. "They're investors for Mark's company," she said. "It's a very important meeting. We need the house to be perfect." I understood the need for things to be perfect, but I did not understand where that left me. "So, the sofa is for them?" I asked. My mother nodded, still not looking at me. "Yes," she whispered. A cold silence fell over the room. My father cleared his throat and stared at the television, pretending not to hear. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I knew what was coming next, but I could not believe it. "We cleaned out the shed for you," Clara said brightly. "It's actually quite cozy. We put a cot in there, and everything." The shed. They wanted me to sleep in the tool shed. It was a small wooden building at the back of the garden where my father kept the lawnmower and rusty old paint cans. It was not insulated. It had a concrete floor. It smelled of gasoline and damp earth. I stared at them, waiting for one of them to laugh, to tell me it was a joke. No one did. My mother finally met my gaze. Her eyes were pleading. "It's just for one night, honey," she said. "It's so important for Mark and Clara. My own importance was not part of the equation. I was a problem to be stored away." I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand why my sister's husband's potential investors were more important than their own daughter. But I saw the closed-off expressions on their faces. They had already decided. Arguing would only make it worse. It would make me the difficult one, the one who ruined Easter. So I swallowed the anger and the hurt. I gave a tight, false smile. "Okay," I said. "The shed sounds fine." The relief on my mother's face was like a physical blow. She was glad I did not fight. She was glad I made it easy for her to cast me aside. Clara handed me a single pillow and a thin blanket. "Here you go," she said, as if she were doing me a great favor. I walked out the back door and across the damp grass to the shed. The air was cold. It promised a frost before morning. The shed door creaked open. The single bare bulb inside cast a weak, yellow light. There was a metal cot pushed against one wall, the kind you see in old army movies. The blanket they gave me was barely thick enough to be a beach towel. I could see my breath in the air. This was where my family thought I belonged. I lay down on the cot, fully clothed. I did not bother to take off my shoes. The cold from the concrete floor seeped through the thin mattress. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, but it offered no real warmth. I could hear their laughter from the house. They were probably watching a movie, warm and comfortable, having forgotten all about the daughter they put in the shed. I did not sleep. I just lay there in the cold and the dark, and I let the hurt turn into something else. It became something hard and clear. It became resolve. I knew, in that moment, that something had broken for good. The sun rose. I was stiff and frozen. I had finally drifted into a shallow, restless sleep around dawn. I woke up to the sound of birds, not to the sound of my family calling me for breakfast. I sat up, my body aching. I walked to the door of the shed and opened it. The garden was empty. The house was silent. I walked across the lawn to the back door. It was unlocked. I stepped inside. The kitchen was clean. Too clean. The lemon cake I had brought was gone. Not eaten.
Gone.
It was not in the refrigerator. It was not on the counter. It was in the trash can, still mostly whole, thrown away like garbage. I walked through the house. It was empty. The beds were made. Clara and Mark's suitcases were gone. My parents' car was missing from the driveway. There was no note. No text message. Nothing. They had just left. They had packed up their real guests, my sister and her family, and they had left me behind, asleep in the shed. I stood alone in the silent house, and the full weight of their message hit me. It was not just about needing the sofa. It was not just about the investors. They were showing me my place. Then I saw it. On the kitchen table, there was a single piece of paper. It was a note, but it was not for me. It was my mother's handwriting, a to-do list. It said, "Pack snacks for the trip. Tidy up for the realtor. Leave the key under the mat for them. Call Clara about the final offer realtor." Final offer. My blood ran cold. They were selling the house. The house my grandfather built, the house that was supposed to be our family's anchor. And they had not said a single word to me. I sank into a chair. The silence of the house was deafening. It was not just a house. It was my childhood. It was every Easter, every Christmas, every birthday. And they were selling it behind my back. The phrase Clara had used echoed in my mind. This house is for real guests, I finally understood. The investors were not the guests. The potential buyers were. I was not just an inconvenience for the night. I was an obstacle to their plans. They did not want me here to ask questions. They did not want me here to have an opinion. They left me in the shed and drove away because, to them, I was no longer part of the family that mattered. The feeling of betrayal was so sharp, it was hard to breathe. I thought about all the times I had made excuses for them. Clara's cruelty was just sibling rivalry, my mother's favoritism was just her being overwhelmed, my father's silence was just him, not wanting to cause trouble. I saw it all now with perfect clarity.
It was not a series of small slights.
It was a pattern. It was a deliberate, sustained effort to push me out, to make me feel small, so they could do whatever they wanted without any resistance from me. They thought I would just accept it. They thought I would just quietly disappear. They were wrong. My first call was to my Aunt Patricia. She was my mother's sister, a sensible woman who had always been kind to me. I kept my voice steady. I did not want to sound hysterical. "Aunt Patricia, it's Lily," I said. "I have a strange question. Did Eleanor mention she was selling the house?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Selling the house?" she repeated.
No, dir.
"Why would you think that?" Her surprise sounded genuine. It confirmed they were keeping it a secret from everyone. "I'm at their place," I explained. "They left this morning without a word, and I found a note about a realtor and a final offer." "They left you there?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Lily, where did they go?" I took a deep breath. "I don't know," I admitted. "They made me sleep in the shed last night, and when I woke up, they were gone." The silence that followed was heavy with her shock. "The shed?" she finally said. Eleanor made you sleep in the shed? I could hear the anger in her voice, and it was a small comfort. Yes, I said. They said the house was for real guests. I told her the whole story. The investors, the insults, the lemon cake in the trash. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she was furious. That is the most monstrous thing I have ever heard, she said. Eleanor has lost her mind. And David is just as bad for letting it happen. And Clara. Well, Clara has always been selfish. She promised to try and call my mother. She said she would not let this go. I thanked her and hung up. Her support was a lifeline, but I knew it was not enough. My mother was an expert at twisting stories, at making herself the victim. She would tell Patricia I was overreacting, that I had misunderstood. I needed more than outrage. I needed facts. I started to search the house. I began in my father's office. It was a small room, cluttered with papers and books. My father was a meticulous man. He kept records of everything. I opened his desk drawer. Inside, I found a folder labeled Household. I pulled it out and sat on the floor, my heart pounding. I sifted through insurance papers, utility bills, and old receipts. And then I found it. It was a property appraisal report, dated 2 weeks ago. The value listed was much higher than I expected. Tucked behind it was a business card for a real estate agent. I pulled out my phone and looked up the agent's name. Her website was full of pictures of her smiling in front of expensive homes. Her specialty was discreet sales for high-value properties. This was not a normal sale. This was a plan that had been in motion for a while. I felt a surge of cold anger. They had sat with me at dinner, making small talk, all while knowing they were about to sell the foundation of our family from under my feet. The shed was not an impulse. It was part of the plan to get me out of the way. I continued to look through the folder. I found a copy of the deed to the house. I read the names listed as owners, David and Eleanor. My grandfather's name was not on it. I remembered him telling me once, long ago, that the house was his legacy for his grandchildren. He had told me it should never be sold, but should be passed down through the generations. Had he just been a sentimental old man? Or was there something my parents were not telling me? It seemed unlikely that a man who planned so carefully for his family's future would leave such a precious asset unprotected. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Aunt Patricia. Your mother isn't answering her phone. Neither is your father. I left several messages. This is not like them, I texted back. They're avoiding you. They know you'll call them out. I knew I was right. My parents hated confrontation, especially with people they could not easily dismiss. I was family they could control. Patricia was a peer they could not. Her disapproval would sting. I decided to check my mother's laptop, which she had left on the dining room table. It was password protected, but I knew her password. It was the name of her childhood dog. I opened it and went straight to her email. I felt a pang of guilt for invading her privacy, but it vanished as soon as I saw the subject lines. There were dozens of emails back and forth with the realtor. They were discussing staging the house, open houses, and offers. One email chain caught my eye. The subject was the Lily problem. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was an email from Clara to my mother. It read, Mom, we need to make sure Lily doesn't find out about the sale until it's too late. She'll get emotional and try to stop it. We need to handle her. Maybe we can tell her we're going on a little trip for Easter, and she can't come. Or we can just make it uncomfortable enough for her that she leaves on her own. My mother's reply was short and chilling. I agree. Let me think about it. The investors visiting is a good cover story. We can use that. They had plotted against me. They had discussed how to handle me. The shed was not just a place to sleep. It was a tactic. It was a weapon designed to make me feel so unwanted that I would run away, leaving them free to complete their betrayal. The cruelty was not a byproduct of their plan. It was the plan itself. The coldness of their words on the screen was worse than any insult spoken to my face. This was them, in private, confirming that I was nothing more than a problem to be managed. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. The email was proof. It was undeniable evidence of their intent. But it did not give me any power to stop the sale. They were the legal owners. They could do what they wanted. My grandfather's wishes were just that, wishes. They were not legally binding. Or were they? I thought back to his words. He had been a lawyer himself. He was not a man who spoke in sentimental fluff. He was a man of contracts and clauses. It was possible he had put something in place. But where would I find it? I needed help. I thought of my cousin Ben. He was a lawyer, just like our grandfather. He specialized in estate law. We were not incredibly close, but we had always been friendly. He was Patricia's son, and he had her same no-nonsense attitude. I found his number in my phone and dialed. I explained the situation, my voice low and urgent. I told him about the shed, the missing family, the note, the realtor, and the emails. He listened patiently, a skill he had likely perfected in his profession. "Lily, that's awful," he said when I finished. "On a personal level, I'm so sorry you're going through this. On a professional level, it sounds like you need to figure out exactly what your legal standing is." I agreed. "Grandfather always said this house was meant for the grandkids," I told him. "He said it should never be sold. Is it possible he put that in a will or a trust?" Ben was quiet for a moment. "It's possible," he said. "A man like him might have created a trust to protect the property. A simple will wouldn't be enough, because once your parents inherited it, they could do whatever they wanted. But a trust has rules that have to be followed. How would I find out if a trust exists?" I asked. "It would be a legal document," he explained. "It might be filed with the county, or it might be with the records of the lawyer who drafted his will." Do you know who that was? I did not. My grandfather had passed away over a decade ago. "I can do some digging," Ben offered. "I have access to certain legal databases. If there's a trust associated with that property address, I should be able to find it. But it might take a day or 2 inch a day or 2 felt like an eternity." The note said final offer. They were moving fast. "Is there anything I can do right now?" I asked, a sense of desperation creeping into my voice. "You can look for any of his old papers," Ben suggested. "He might have kept a copy of his legal documents in the house. A safe deposit box key, a file cabinet, anything like that." I thanked him and hung up. His words gave me a sliver of hope. A trust. That sounded exactly like something my grandfather would do. He never trusted people to do the right thing just because it was the right thing. He believed in creating systems that forced them to. I went back to my father's office. This time, I searched with a new purpose. I was not just looking for clues about the sale. I was looking for a link to the past. I checked every drawer again. I looked through every file folder. Nothing. I looked behind the books on the shelves. I even lifted the rug. The office was small, and there were not many places to hide anything. I was about to give up when my eyes landed on a framed photograph on the wall. It was a picture of my grandfather, standing proudly in front of the house on the day it was finished. It was my favorite picture of him. He looked so strong and happy. I took the picture off the wall. It was heavier than it should have been. I turned it over. The back was sealed with brown paper, as expected. But as I ran my fingers over it, I felt a slight bulge in the center. My heart started to beat faster. I carefully tore the paper backing. Taped to the inside of the frame was a small, flat, brass key. It was a key to a safe deposit box. There was a small tag attached to it. It had the name of a bank and a box number. I stared at the key. This was it. This had to be it. My grandfather had hidden it in plain sight, in a place he knew his family would see every day, but would never think to look.
It was a message from the past.
I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My parents had underestimated me. They thought I was the emotional, irrational one. They had no idea I had inherited my grandfather's patience and his methodical nature. They had left me in a house full of their secrets, and I was going to uncover every single one. The next morning, I drove to the bank listed on the key tag. It was an old, established bank downtown, the kind with marble floors and high ceilings. I walked up to the counter, my hands clammy. I explained that I had a key to a safe deposit box that had belonged to my grandfather. I showed the clerk the key and my ID. She looked at me with a practiced, neutral expression. "Do you have the paperwork that lists you as an authorized person on this box?" she asked. I felt my stomach drop. "No," I said. He passed away years ago. I just found the key. She shook her head. I'm sorry, she said. Without the proper authorization, I can't grant you access. Privacy regulations are very strict, I pleaded with her. I told her it was a family emergency. She was unmoved. Bank policy was bank policy. I left the bank feeling defeated. I had the key, the literal key to everything, but I could not use it. I sat in my car, the brass key feeling heavy in my hand.
What now?
They had thought of everything. Or rather, the system had. I called Ben again. I told him about the key and the bank's refusal. He sighed. That's standard procedure, Lily, he said. They can't just let anyone with a key open a box. We need to prove you have a right to access it. That means we need a copy of his will or the trust document that names you as a beneficiary or successor trustee. We were back to square one. We needed the document to get the document. It was a frustrating, circular problem. Keep looking for papers at the house, he advised. And let me keep digging on my end. Something will break. I drove back to the house, my frustration mounting. I felt like I was racing against a clock, but I did not know how much time I had left. When I got back, I saw an unfamiliar car in the driveway. It was the realtor. A woman in a sharp suit was walking around the front yard, taking notes on a clipboard. She saw me get out of my car and smiled a bright, professional smile.
Hi there, she said.
Can I help you? I crossed my arms. This is my family's house, I said, my voice colder than I intended. Who are you? Her smile faltered for a second. Oh, she said.
I'm Suzanne.
I'm the listing agent. Your parents didn't mention you'd be here. The casual way she said your parents made my blood boil. They're out of town, I said, keeping my tone even. What are you doing here? She recovered quickly, her professional mask back in place. I was just taking some exterior measurements for the listing, she said. We're hoping to have it on the market by the end of the week. We've already had a fantastic pre-market offer. Your parents are very motivated to sell quickly. Every word she said was like a twist of a knife. End of the week, final offer, it was all happening so fast. I had to slow them down. I had to find a way to stop this. There's been a misunderstanding, I said, forcing a calm I did not feel. There are some family matters that need to be sorted out before any sale can happen. The house is not ready to be listed. Susan looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Well, she said, your parents signed the listing agreement. As far as I'm concerned, we're moving forward. If you have an issue, you need to take it up with them. She was right. I had no legal power to stop her. I was just the daughter they had left in the shed. I watched her get back in her car and drive away. The visit had confirmed my worst fears. They were not just planning this. They were executing it, and they were days away from succeeding. The anger I felt was so intense it made my head pound. I went back inside the house, my mind a whirlwind of frustration and fear. I had to find something. I had to find it now. I started tearing the office apart, not just looking in drawers but emptying them. I pulled books off shelves, shaking them to see if anything fell out. I ran my hands along the backs of paintings. I felt like a thief in my own home, but I was desperate. I worked for hours, until the office was a chaotic mess of paper and books. I found nothing. I finally sank to the floor, exhausted and on the verge of tears. They had covered their tracks perfectly. They had left nothing behind for me to find. Just as I was about to give up, my phone rang. It was Ben. I found something, he said, and my heart leaped. It's not the trust itself, but it's a record of its existence. I found the original filing from when your grandfather's estate was settled. It mentions the creation of the David and Eleanor family trust, but here's the interesting part. The property, the house, was not transferred to them as individuals. It was transferred to the trust. I sat up straight. What does that mean? I asked. It means, he said, his voice quickening with excitement, that they don't own the house. The trust owns the house. They are the trustees, which gives them control, but they are bound by the rules of the trust. They can't just sell it and pocket the money if the trust document says otherwise. This was the breakthrough I needed. So, if the trust says the house has to be passed down to the grandchildren, They can't legally sell it. I asked, hardly daring to hope. Exactly, Ben confirmed. Any sale would be illegal. It would be a breach of their fiduciary duty as trustees. And here's the other thing I found. You, Lily, are listed as a co-trustee, with your rights to be activated on your 25th birthday. I was 26. What does that mean? I asked, my mind struggling to keep up. It means you have just as much power as they do, he said. They need your signature to sell that house. They can't do it without you. A wave of relief, so powerful it made me dizzy, washed over me. I had power. I was not just the inconvenient daughter. I was a co-trustee. I had a legal right to stop them. But they have a realtor, Ben, I said. They have an offer. They're moving forward as if they have every right to sell. That's because they're hoping you never find out, he said. They are committing fraud, Lily. They are lying to the realtor, to the buyers, and to you. They are breaking the law. The full scope of their deception was staggering. This was not just a family squabble. This was a calculated, illegal act. They were trying to steal my inheritance and my sister's for their own gain. The shed, the lies, the secrecy, it all clicked into place. They had to get me out of the picture because my signature was legally required. My presence was a direct threat to their crime. So what do I do now? I asked Ben. First, he said, his voice now all business, we need a copy of the full trust document. It will detail all the rules, all the beneficiaries, and all the assets. It's almost certainly in that safe deposit box. Now that we know you're a trustee, we can get a court order to open it. I'll start drafting the paperwork right away.
It should only take a day.
I could wait a day. Second, he continued, you need to inform the realtor in writing that the sale is unauthorized. Tell her that the property is held in a trust and that you are a co-trustee who does not consent to the sale. That will put a stop to everything immediately. No agent will risk her license over a fraudulent sale. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had a plan. I had a legal path forward. I was not helpless anymore.
He thanked Ben profusely.
He told me he would email me a template for the letter to the realtor. After we hung up, I sat in the messy office, the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. I looked at the picture of my grandfather on the floor. He had known. He had known his children's weaknesses. He had known their capacity for greed and selfishness. And he had put a plan in place to protect his grandchildren. He had left me a key and a legal shield. I waited for Ben's email. It arrived 20 minutes later. It was a formal, intimidating letter full of legal terms like fiduciary duty, breach of trust, and fraudulent misrepresentation. It stated clearly that I was a trustee and that any attempt to sell the property without my written consent would be met with legal action. I printed it out. I found an envelope and a stamp. I drove to the post office and sent it via certified mail to the realtor's office address. I also sent a copy to her email. I wanted to make sure there was no way she could claim she had not received it. Then I waited. The rest of the day was quiet. I cleaned up the office, putting everything back in its place. The house felt different now. It was not just a place of painful memories. It was a fortress. It was my legacy, and I was going to defend it. I received no calls from my parents or my sister. They were still in their bubble of denial, moving forward with their plan, unaware that I was about to blow it all up. I slept on the sofa that night. It was much more comfortable than the shed. The next morning, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Is this Lily?" a woman's voice asked. It was sharp and angry. "This is Susan, the realtor." I sat up. "Yes, this is she," I said calmly. "I received your email," she said, her voice dripping with fury. "What is the meaning of this? I have a signed contract with your parents. We have a cash offer on the table, well over asking price. Are you trying to sabotage this deal?" "I'm not trying to sabotage anything," I replied, my voice steady. "Ben had told me to stay calm and state the facts. I am informing you that the sale is illegal. The property is owned by a trust, not by my parents as individuals. I am a co-trustee. My consent is required for any sale, and I do not consent." There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line. That's ridiculous, she said. They showed me the deed. Their names are on it, then they showed you an old deed. I countered. The property was transferred into the trust over 10 years ago. You can check the county records if you don't believe me. The line went silent. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she realized the massive legal trouble she was in. She had been lied to. She was facilitating a fraudulent transaction.
I
will have to speak with my broker, she stammered. And with my lawyer. You'll be hearing from them. I look forward to it, I said. And I would advise you to cease all activity related to the sale of this property immediately. The listing should be taken down, and the potential buyers should be informed that the sellers do not have the legal authority to sell. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from the thrill of taking back control. I had fired the first shot, and it had hit its mark. An hour later, I got a call from Ben. The court order came through, he said. We can go to the bank. I'll meet you there in 30 minutes. I felt a jolt of excitement. We were finally going to see what my grandfather had written. I met Ben at the bank. He was carrying a briefcase and looked every bit the serious lawyer. We were escorted down to the vault by the bank manager, who was much more cooperative now that we had a court order. He used his key, I used mine, and the small metal door to the safe deposit box swung open. Ben pulled out a long, thin metal box. We took it to a private viewing room. He opened the lid. Inside, there was a thick stack of documents, tied with a blue ribbon. It was the trust. Ben untied the ribbon and began to read. I watched his face, trying to decipher his expression. He was silent for a long time, his eyes scanning the pages. Finally, he looked up at me. Lily, he said, his voice full of awe, your grandfather was a brilliant man. He explained a trust to me in simple terms. The house was, as he suspected, the primary asset. The rules were ironclad. It could not be sold until all of his grandchildren had reached the age of 30. At that point, we could either decide to sell it and split the proceeds, or one of us could buy out the other's shares. Until then, it was to be maintained as a family home, with the costs covered by a separate investment account set up within the trust. My parents, as trustees, were responsible for managing the property and the investments. They were allowed to live there, but they did not own it. But that was not the most shocking part. My grandfather had also established 2 separate subtrusts, one for me and one for Clara. These were educational and startup funds. Each was funded with a significant amount of money. We were supposed to be given full access to them on our 21st birthdays. I was 26. I had never received a penny. I had never even been told this fund existed. I had worked 2 jobs to put myself through college. I had taken out student loans, which I was still paying off. All that time, there had been a trust fund in my name, waiting for me. Ben pointed to a clause in the document. Look at this, he said. Your parents, as trustees, were legally obligated to inform you of this trust's existence on your 21st birthday. They were required to turn control of the funds over to you. They didn't do that. Instead, he flipped to another section, a record of account statements. They've been taking money out of it. Not just your fund, Lily. Clara's too. The statements showed regular, large withdrawals over the past 5 years. The destination account was listed as a corporate entity I did not recognize. What is that company? I asked. Ben typed the name into his phone. He was quiet for a moment. It's the holding company for Mark's failed tech startup, he said. The air left my lungs. It was all connected. They had not just been planning to sell the house. They had been systematically stealing from me and my sister for years. They had drained our inheritance to fund their son-in-law's bad business ideas. The sale of the house was not just for their own retirement. It was a desperate attempt to cover their tracks, to get a huge influx of cash to pay back the money they had stolen before anyone found out. They were not just liars and manipulators. They were criminals. They stole my money, I whispered, the reality of it sinking in. They watched me struggle to pay for school, knowing they had a fortune of my own money hidden away. The betrayal was so profound, it was almost beyond comprehension. This was a level of deception I could not have imagined. What do we do? I asked Ben. His expression was grim. We have them, he said. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is theft. This is embezzlement. This is multiple felonies. They could go to jail for this, Lily. The thought of my parents in jail was a horrifying one. But the thought of them getting away with this was even worse. They had treated me like I was nothing. They had stolen my future. They had done it all with a smile on their faces, while lecturing me about family and togetherness. I want to confront them, I said, my voice hard. I want them to look me in the eye and explain this. We will, Ben said. But we're going to do it on our terms. We have all the power now. We have the trust document. We have the bank statements. They have nowhere to run. We made copies of everything. Ben kept the originals in his office safe. I went back to the house, my mind reeling. The quiet rooms seemed to mock me. They were a stage for a decades-long performance of a happy family, and I had been the only one who did not know it was all an act. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was a frantic screech. "Lily, what did you do?" she shrieked. "The realtor called me. She's dropping us as clients. She was talking about fraud." "What did you tell her?" I took a deep, steadying breath. This is it. The confrontation begins. I told her the truth. I said, my voice calm and even. I told her you don't have the legal right to sell the house. That it's held in a trust. There was a choked sound on the other end of the line.
How?
How did you know about the trust? She stammered. You were never supposed to know about that. Her admission was so blatant, so shameless. It took my breath away. She was not even trying to deny it. She was just angry I had found out. I know about a lot of things, Mom, I said. I know about the trust fund grandfather left for me. The one you were supposed to tell me about on my 21st birthday. The one you've been stealing from for the past 5 years. The silence was absolute. I had laid the bomb on the table, and she had no idea how to react. I could hear her ragged breathing. That's a lie, she finally whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. It's not a lie, I said. I have the bank statements. I know you've been funneling my money and Clara's money into Mark's failing business. The house sale was just your desperate attempt to cover the hole, wasn't it? She started to sob. They were not tears of remorse. They were tears of a trapped animal. You don't understand, she cried. Mark needed our help. His business is going to be huge. We were going to pay it all back. You were gambling with my future, I said, my voice like ice. You let me take on thousands of dollars in debt while you were handing my inheritance over to Clara's husband. Did you ever, for 1 second, think about me? Her sobs grew louder. We always knew Clara needed more help than you, she said, and the excuse was so pathetic, so transparent, it was almost laughable. You've always been so independent, so strong. Clara is more sensitive. You didn't make her sensitive, Mom, I said. You made her weak. You made her entitled. And you made me an outsider in my own family. We need to talk about this, she said, her voice shifting, trying to find a way to manage me. Your father and I and Clara and Mark, we're driving back now. We'll be there this evening. Don't do anything else until we get there. We can sort this out as a family. We are long past sorting this out as a family, I replied. But yes, you should come back to the house. There will be a meeting. My lawyer will be here too. I heard a sharp intake of breath. A lawyer, she squeaked. You don't need a lawyer, Lily. This is a private matter. You made it a legal matter when you started committing felonies, I said. I'll see you tonight. I hung up the phone. The power had shifted completely. They were not coming home to their house. They were walking into my trap. I called Ben and told him they were on their way. He said he would be there. I also called Aunt Patricia. I told her everything I had found. She was silent for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with sadness and disgust. I am so sorry, Lily, she said. I knew my sister could be selfish, but I never imagined this. I will be there tonight as well. I want to hear her explain this to my face. I was grateful for her support. I would not be alone. That evening, I waited. Ben arrived first, his briefcase full of documents. Aunt Patricia arrived a few minutes later, her face set in a grim expression. We sat in the living room. The room where they had told me I would be sleeping on the sofa before they cast me out to the shed. The irony was not lost on me. We did not have to wait long. A car pulled into the driveway. The front door opened. My parents, Clara and Mark, walked in. They looked tired and stressed from the drive. They stopped short when they saw us. My mother's face went pale. My father stared at the floor. Clara looked from me to Ben to Patricia, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Mark just looked angry, his arms crossed over his chest. "What is this?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "What are they doing here?" "They're here as witnesses," I said, my voice ringing with a confidence I had never felt before. "Please have a seat," they hesitated, but then slowly sat down on the sofa opposite us. The four of them were squeezed together, a united front of guilt.
My father would not look at me.
Clara kept glancing at her husband. Mark was glaring at me, as if this were all my fault. "Lily, I think we should discuss this privately," my father mumbled, his first words since they had arrived. "No," I said firmly. "We're going to discuss this right here, right now. All of it." Ben placed his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it. He took out a copy of the trust document. "Let's start with this," he said, his voice calm and professional. "The trust established by your late father. The trust that clearly states this property cannot be sold. The trust that makes Lily a co-trustee. Were you aware of these terms when you signed a listing agreement with a realtor to sell this house?" My parents stared at the document as if it were a snake. My mother shook her head, a pathetic attempt at denial. I didn't remember the details," she stammered. "You didn't remember?" Aunt Patricia cut in, her voice sharp. "Eleanor, you were the executor of Daddy's will. You helped set this trust up. You knew exactly what it said." My mother flinched. Ben continued, pulling out the bank statements. "Let's move on to the sub-trusts," he said. "Specifically, the funds set aside for Lily and Clara. The funds you were legally obligated to inform them of on their 21st birthdays. The funds you have been systematically draining for the past 5 years." He laid the statements on the table, the withdrawals highlighted in yellow. Clara gasped. She looked at my mother, then at Mark. "What is he talking about?" she asked, her voice a high-pitched whisper. "What money?" Mark shot her a look, trying to silence her, but it was too late. "He's talking about your inheritance, Clara," I said, looking directly at my sister. "The money grandfather left for you. Mom and Dad have been giving it to Mark to prop up his failing business." Clara's face crumpled. She stared at her husband. "Mark, is that true?" He refused to answer. He just stared at the wall. "We were going to pay it back," my mother insisted, her voice rising. "It was an investment. Mark's company is going to be a huge success. His last 3 companies were also going to be a huge success," Ben said drily, without looking up from his papers. "They all went bankrupt. You poured over $200,000 of your daughter's inheritance into a black hole. That's not an investment. That's theft. $200,000. The number hung in the air, heavy and obscene. Clara started to cry, quiet, hiccuping sobs. She finally understood that she was a victim too. She had been a pawn in their game, her future sold off just like mine. "I want you to tell me why," I said, my voice low. I looked at my mother, then my father. "Look at me and tell me why you did this. Why you let me struggle. Why you lied to my face every single day. Why you threw me in a shed like I was garbage." My father finally looked up. His eyes were red. "We were in trouble, Lily," he said, his voice hoarse. "Mark. He convinced us that his business was the only way out. He said he could double the money. We got in too deep. We didn't know how to stop. So you stole from your own children," Aunt Patricia said, her voice filled with contempt. "You stole from them, and you lied to them. And you, Eleanor, you treated one daughter like a princess and the other like a servant, all while you were robbing them both blind. How do you sleep at night?" "Clara needed the support," my mother wailed. "Mark is ambitious. They have a family to think about. Lily has always been fine on her own. This is it. The core of it. I'm strong, so I don't deserve help. I'm independent, so I don't deserve protection. Being strong doesn't mean I deserve to be stolen from," I said. My voice is shaking now. The calm is gone. This is real. Being independent doesn't mean I deserve to be lied to. You didn't do this for Clara. You did this for yourselves. You wanted the reflected glory of a successful son-in-law, and you are willing to sacrifice my future, and even Clara's, to get it. I turned to my sister. Did you know Clara? Did you have any idea where the money was coming from? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, she whispered. Mark told me his parents were helping him. He told me the business was doing great. I didn't know, I believed her. Clara was selfish and cruel in her own ways, but she was not smart enough for this level of deception. She was just as much a fool as I was, just a more pampered one. So, Ben said, his voice cutting through the emotional chaos. Here is what is going to happen. He laid out the terms. First, my parents would immediately resign as trustees of the family trust. I would take over as the sole managing trustee. Second, they would sign a confession of judgment, a legal document admitting to the theft of the funds from my and Clara's sub-trusts. Third, they would agree to a repayment plan. Ben had already calculated the total amount stolen, plus interest and penalties. It was a staggering sum. You will sell your cars, Ben said. You will liquidate your retirement accounts. You will sell any assets you have. And you, Mark, your company's remaining assets, if there are any, will be seized. Every penny will go to repaying the money you stole. My mother gasped. We'll have nothing left, she whispered. You'll have what you deserve, Aunt Patricia snapped. That's better than what you were willing to leave your daughters. And what if we refuse? Mark sneered, finally speaking. He was trying to project an image of strength, but his face was pale with sweat. Ben smiled, a thin, cold smile. If you refuse, he said, then I will take this file to the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. You will be charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Your parents are in their 60s. They will likely die in prison. You, Mark, will serve a very long time. And Clara, as a co-conspirator who benefited from the stolen funds, will likely be charged as well. Clara let out a small scream. She grabbed Mark's arm. No, she cried. Mark, you have to sign it. We have to sign it. The fight went out of them. They were beaten. Ben pushed the documents across the table. One by one, my father, my mother, and Mark signed them. Their hands trembled. Their grand plan had crumbled into dust. They had lost everything. The house, their money, their reputation, and their family. After they signed, there was nothing left to say. They stood up, a broken, defeated group. You need to leave, I said, my voice empty of all emotion. Get your things and go. Where will we go? My mother asked, her voice a pathetic whine. That is no longer my concern, I said. You have a car. You can figure it out. They shuffled out of the room like ghosts. Clara was still crying. Mark was dragging her by the arm. My father did not look back. My mother paused at the door. She looked at me, her eyes begging for something, forgiveness, pity, I don't know what. I just stared back at her, my face a blank mask.
She turned and left.
Aunt Patricia and Ben stayed with me. We sat in the quiet living room. The air felt lighter, cleaner. You are incredible, Lily, Patricia said, taking my hand. Your grandfather would be so proud of you. I felt a swell of emotion, but I pushed it down. I was not ready to feel anything yet. I was just numb. Ben packed up his briefcase. I'll file these documents tomorrow, he said. The process of seizing their assets will begin immediately. It will be a long road, but you will get your money back, I thanked him. He was more than a cousin, more than a lawyer. He had been my champion. After they left, I walked through the house. My house now. Every room was filled with memories, good and bad. I went to my old bedroom, the one Clara and Mark had been staying in. They had left in a hurry. A magazine was left open on the bedside table. It was a luxury travel magazine, open to a page about a world cruise. They had not just been stealing to cover their debts. They had been stealing to fund a fantasy life, a life they felt they were entitled to, a life built on my stolen future. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. I walked out to the backyard. I stood in front of the shed. The door was slightly ajar. I could see the metal caught inside, a symbol of my humiliation. It was the place they had put me when I was no longer useful to them. It was where they had tried to break my spirit. But they had failed. They had not broken me. They had forged me into something stronger. I did not realize I was crying until I felt a tear run down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. The next few weeks were a blur of legal activity. Ben was true to his word. My parents' assets were frozen. Their car was repossessed. They were forced to sell my mother's jewelry. Mark's company was officially declared bankrupt, and its few remaining assets were liquidated. The money started to trickle back into a new account that Ben had set up for me and Clara. I insisted that Clara's share be put into a separate trust that she could not access without a co-signature from a financial advisor. I did not trust her not to give it right back to Mark. My parents and the others ended up moving into a small, shabby apartment 2 hours away. I heard from Aunt Patricia that my father got a job as a greeter at a big box store. My mother did not leave the apartment. Mark was working a manual labor job, trying to pay off his massive debts. Clara had to get a job for the first time in her life as a cashier at a grocery store. Their downfall was swift and complete. They had lost their home, their savings, and their social standing. They were exactly what they had always feared becoming: ordinary, struggling people. I received a letter from my mother a month later. It was full of self-pity and blame. She blamed Mark for his bad ideas. She blamed my father for being weak. She even blamed her own father for setting up such a complicated trust. She never once took responsibility for her own actions. She ended the letter by saying she hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive them one day. I threw the letter in the trash. Forgiveness was not something she could demand, and it was not something I was prepared to give. I used some of the recovered money to pay off my student loans. The feeling of making that final payment, of being free from that debt, was indescribable. It was a weight lifted that I had been carrying for years, a weight my parents had forced me to carry unnecessarily. I also hired a contractor. The first thing I had him do was tear down the shed. I watched as the walls were knocked down and the splintered wood was hauled away. I had the ground tilled and planted a garden in its place. I wanted to grow something new and beautiful where something ugly had stood. The house is quiet now. It is filled with my own things. I painted the walls. I bought new furniture. I made it my own. Sometimes, when the light hits a certain way, I can still feel the echoes of the past. But they are getting fainter every day. I am not haunted by what they did to me anymore. I am empowered by it. They tried to make me small, to make me disappear. Instead, they showed me how strong I am. Aunt Patricia comes over for dinner sometimes. We sit in the garden and talk. She tells me I am more like my grandfather than I know. I think she is right. I have his strength, his resolve, and his unwillingness to suffer fools. I do not know if I will ever speak to my parents or my sister again. The damage they did is too deep, the betrayal too complete. But I am at peace with that. I have built a new life for myself, a life based on truth and self-respect. The house is no longer a place for real guests, it is a home. My home. And the only guests who enter are the ones who have earned their place. The ones who see me and respect me for who I am. The shed is gone now. I tore it down myself. The only guests in this house now are the ones I invite.